suck it in, but you can't hold it that for 45 minutes.
Well, man, I'm in good shape now.
No, you are actually.
I'm in good shape now.
I was going to say that, but I just saw you go.
You don't know.
No, listen, I just saw you go.
No, because I was dealing with my belt. My belt's tight.
Oh, okay.
All right, episode 4. Super excited. Really, really special guest today and special friend of mine, Dwiinga. He's been here for 13 years from Lusaka, Zambia. Now, that is one part, but then the other part is him immigrating to the UK. Another part, him coming all the way to New Zealand. We're going to find out all about it today. Switch it up now. You have been here for a whopping, sorry, I didn't pull out my notes. I should have been more prepared to pull out my notes the first time.
13 years.
13 years.
13 and a bit, yes.
13 years, yeah. Originally from Lusaka, Zambia?
No.
I said that wrong, didn't I?
Not quite.
No, wait. Lusaka.
That's the one.
Lusaka,
yes.
Zambia. All the Zambians don't get mad at me. Now, come on now.
That's all right. I'm sure you'll understand. Some American guys want to pronounce it, so it's all right. Don't get it.
I don't need.
I'm just saying.
Lusaka, Zambia.
Yeah.
13 years in New Zealand.
Yes.
But your story is a little bit more interesting, and it's more than meets the eye. So as you guys know, for those of you guys who've been tuning in to the immigration status, we literally are just trying to get your story of, first of all, how it was in the immigration process, dealing with immigration in New Zealand, visa swaps, etc.
Yeah.
And then your cultural fit, how things were, you fitting into New Zealand culture, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's dig into it.
All right.
Let's dig into it, man. So first and foremost, let's talk about when you got here and why you got here. Like why did you come to New Zealand?
That's a really interesting question. But before I even answer that question, I want to go back to the point around. So I'm from Zambia in terms of originally, but I came to New Zealand from England because I was raised in England basically. So it's a little bit different. So when I actually looked at the title of this podcast, which was Immigration Status, and I was just thinking to myself, that's interesting. And I think the guy who sent me an email to invite me to the talk talked about how we're trying to give immigrants a voice, right? Yeah. And I was like, that's interesting. I've never really seen myself as an immigrant, right? So that was the first time that sort of popped into my mind. I'm like, oh, snap. Okay. So anyway, I sort of looked it up, and I'm like, actually, it's a very interesting definition of an immigrant, right? If you look at it from a dictionary point of view, right? I'm not going to get into that for now, but I literally never. Okay, I will in a minute, but I literally never ever imagined myself as an immigrant until I saw the message come through a couple of days ago, right? And it got me thinking about that. So yeah, so maybe we can get into that a little bit more because I really want to unpack that idea of an immigrant because obviously most people know that, that term tends to have negative connotations. If you look at, your ex-president, Donald Trump, that was part of his campaign, around stopping the immigrants, those Mexicans, right? And then I think the Brexit thing was kind of similar to that as well, right? There was this idea of actually, the immigrants, right? So I'm always very conscious of the use of that word, especially now, actually, right? Because at first, I just didn't see myself as that initially, right? So, but yeah, I do want to talk about that. But in terms of sort of how I came to New Zealand, I'm literally like, I suppose I came here for my sort of OE experience, overseas experience, right? Literally, it wasn't a case of, I'm not like I guess I'm not the sort of general definition of an immigrant in terms of someone who's running away from some conflict in their country that, their country's falling apart. That's not the definition of me, right? I came obviously literally because my wife got given a scholarship, right, to do a study at Massey. And cool. I was like a young guy, and I'm like, hey, look, I don't have any kids. I don't have any major commitments. When I was back in England, and I'm like, actually, let's go check out New Zealand, right? And that was 13 years ago, right? So that was kind of how we ended up here. Literally, it was like, let's just give it a try, see what it's like. I'm still young. Let's go try out another country. And then, we came here. It was meant to be for 4 years only because her PhD was only 4 years. Yeah. And then, still here 13 years later. So it wasn't really meant to be like, coming to live in New Zealand indefinitely. It wasn't like that. It was literally just go there for 4 years, check it out, and then come back. But still here for now.
Well, look, before we get into this, I just want to let you guys know that I've known Danny for a long time. So any type of internal animosity you see on camera, just know that it's all love. It's all love. You know, honestly, all jokes aside, like you've been a huge part of my life from the jump, man. Like, it's like I got here in 2010 for the first time. That was the first time I traveled to New Zealand, and him and his wife Paulina, obviously huge part of me and my wife's life. Like, always been a pillar in our life, and we appreciate it and we love you. So I think what you'll see in this conversation, just know that we actually don't hate each other. There's no real bad blood. No,
I'm only kidding.
There's no. They have been huge pillars in our life, and actually had helped settle in New Zealand in so many different ways in my own immigration story. But it's not about me today. So it's about you. And we've never actually had an opportunity to document your whole story. Even over the years I've known you, I've never had the opportunity to know like the ins and outs. I've known bits and pieces to a point where I had this running joke where I used to tell you, I'm not sure that your name is Danny.
Right.
Because I used to be like, I don't really know much about y'all. You know, I'm sleeping at your house. I don't know who you really are.
I'm like, listen, you don't need to know more than you already know. I'm telling you.
That's and he will never be really, really secretive about who he is. So today we're going to find out the truth. So FBI, be ready.
So good, okay. Bring it on. Bring it on.
So look, okay, you came here for Paulina's. She had a scholarship. You know, so you weren't really. So the immigration status in that situation was more of a. She had a student visa.
Yes, that's right. She had a student visa, and I had one of those overseas experience visa things that you get. Like, I think it's like you get a 2-year work visa.
Was it a working holiday visa?
No, it was like a 2-year work visa, basically. I think they had this deal thing in England. I think New Zealand and England have this thing going on, and other European countries as well, and other countries as well, where if you're under a certain age, you can come to New Zealand and work for a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
I just did that. It literally took me like 2 weeks to get that visa, right? It was quite easy, actually. So I just applied from England, right? And then a couple of weeks later, you get the thing, and then that was it.
And the process was seamless?
Super easy.
Super easy?
Super easy.
Like
literally, it's literally a couple of weeks, and it was it.
Couple of weeks?
Yeah.
I've heard some horror stories on people waiting on visas.
No, nothing like that. That's what I mean. So it's quite different because, like I said, when I sort of came to New Zealand, I literally never saw myself as, you know, like an immigrant type thing, right? It was really weird, and that's not a state of mind I've had at all. It was literally until I got that letter from, you know, the guy who sent me the letter, made me think about that actually, right? And I was sort of thinking about the same thing. You know, I wonder how, you know, your standard Kiwis, the sort of your traditional Kiwis, that someone put it to me one time, right? I don't even know what that means, right? I said to me, traditional Kiwis, right? You know, when you go to overseas, right? It's an overseas experience, right? When some people go to other countries, it's the immigrants, right? I'm always like, hold on, but what's the difference?
What is the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference between someone from, I don't know, some Asian country or some African country going to New Zealand and they become an immigrant, but someone from some European country, right? They are an expat, you know, or they're an overseas experience, right? I just think that the whole discussion, that whole topic is just one that most people don't want to get into, only because I think everyone's got a view of it. And I think sometimes, like, when you call people immigrants, then it feels like, you know, you do them a favor, right? You know, let's have some programs with these immigrants. You know, some favors for, you know, some programs with these immigrants so we can integrate them into our country. You know, the this and that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. You know, because if that was the case, right, then everyone, you know, no matter sort of the color or whatever it was, right, there will be immigrants, right? But somehow that term tends to get labeled on people or slapped on people from certain areas, right? So this is why I think for me it was a bit of a wake up call when I got that email saying actually, you know, you're actually seen as an immigrant. And I was like, oh, snap. Okay, interested. Right.
Well, I guess we just need to dive into understanding what people consider to be a citizen. Yeah. We have to start there. Like that'll be your base to figure out why that definition is where it is.
Yeah.
A citizen is someone who was born in that nation, right?
Well, not really. No? you can get citizenship by various ways.
Okay, sure. You can get citizenship another, but I guess the traditional understanding is someone who was born there.
That's what I mean. That's, if you actually look at the definition, it's quite different. Right?
What's the definition?
As an example, my wife, Paulina, is a citizen, right? I'm not, because I haven't applied for it. I just didn't see the need for it, right? But she wasn't born here, right? She's actually a citizen of this country, though, right? Whereas obviously there are those people that were born here that are I guess the citizens by birth, right, or by heritage, I guess in that way, right. But yeah, you can get citizenship in different ways as well. So
of course,
that's what I mean.
Course.
So it's one of those kind of things where you really have to think. And the definition, there's a classic standard dictionary definition of what a citizen is, or what an immigrant is, what a foreigner is, and what an expat is, right.
I think we need to get into that. You're gonna make me open up Google in a minute here.
You could look at that, but generally people don't talk about that, right. They tend to literally lump people into immigrants, meaning this and that, right. And this is why I don't like that term.
I'm just going to go with the first definition that comes up.
Look at the first definition of an immigrant. An immigrant is a person who leaves his own country to go and live in another country, right? And then, for example, like an expat is someone who's just living in another country, basically, and they can go back to their own place as it were type thing.
Oh, the New Zealand government has their own definition.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that one. What's that one say?
It says, if you know how to sort it out, mate. No, I was just joking. It says, okay, so there's types of citizenship, birth, and descent. 3 main types: citizenship by birth, citizenship by descent, or citizenship by grant.
Yeah, okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, so we pretty much already covered that with your wife's situation, because different ways to get citizenship.
Yep.
And then immigrant.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting definition. But as I said, there's definitely a classic definition of that from, there's a dictionary definition of that.
The Oxford Dictionary says
that's an interesting
a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country.
Correct.
They pretty much oversimplified.
But actually, funny enough is that's a dictionary definition, but that's not how people use it though. Right? That's not how generally.
Well, expat is what you're questioning.
Yeah, some people are called expats and some people are called immigrants. And I actually did see a BBC article on that, right, from 2017, where it says why are some people, especially said actually that the actual title was why are white people called expats and everybody else called immigrants.
But this was another article.
Yeah, that's
what it said. Why are white people called expats?
Yeah, and then why everybody else
just
called
imagine
immigrants.
Some angry black dude writing that. Why are white people?
Funny you say that. It was actually, I think it was actually, I think it was a Nigerian guy that wrote that, but that's besides the point, right? That is besides the point.
Bro, I can run with that.
It was an interesting article though, right? It's really an interesting article because I think it brought a couple of things to light, especially around how, like I said earlier, generally people tend to feel that the thing about, if someone is an immigrant, then there's this negative connotation to that word, i.e. they're coming to take our jobs and, I don't know, the people that need a lot of our help and whatever the thing is. And that's, like the help part is not a bad thing per se, right? But I think it's just that negative, connotation that the term has, right? So I really think that, for as an example, if this particular podcast and the ministry that's sponsoring this is really wanting to help people, right? It's really having that type of discussion around, actually, let's maybe redefine that word, or maybe not redefine it, just make sure that people actually know how to use it properly, basically, right? Not just see a bunch of people that look in a certain way and then call them that, but everybody else, because they're from, I don't know, some other European country, and then you call them something else. I just feel like some of that stuff just needs to be dealt with if people really want to talk about integration and ensuring that people are treated fairly, basically. Start dealing with the words.
Just a stab in the dark. Yes. What I'm hearing you say, you're talking about prejudice. Right? Yeah,
because I think that word, unfortunately, lends itself really well to things like prejudice, because it's just one of those things. Yeah, you're
talking about seeing a word and think. Yeah, you're talking about prejudice, like prejudging a group of people.
Yep.
Because what do you actually do for a living? I know the answer to this question. I'm just asking.
This podcast has got nothing to do with
this
work.
Podcast has everything to do with what you do.
Listen. Nothing to do with my work, okay?
Right, I just want to know what you do.
Okay, I work for a bank, right? So my title is the head of business intelligence, right?
There's a reason why I asked that question.
Oh yeah, why do you ask that question?
Because it kind of plays into what you were saying about, trying to get rid of the prejudice. Because New Zealand wasn't doing you a favor. You're obviously a very, very smart guy. You would have been just as successful where you were. So that's actually a really good point. You came here because your wife had an opportunity.
Yeah.
And you're being supportive, and you came here and still ended up in that bracket of, what they consider top percentage earners of New Zealand people. So I think that's actually a really good point. So in saying that alone opens up a can of beans that we can get into, because it's like, how have you like found it? Because you originally come from Zambia, but at the same time, your family migrated to UK.
Yeah.
So you had already experienced the immigration thing.
Yeah. That's
before.
quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell me about the UK life?
Yeah, it's a weird one because so when my parents decided to move to England, so this was like early in the 90s, basically, right? And so we were still pretty young, right? And when you're pretty young, there's certain things that you just don't take note of, right? So I don't obviously be quite interesting to talk to my parents to see how they found migrating to England, in the early 90s and what it was like. But us as kids, it was a little bit easier because then in terms of assimilation, just kind of fitting in was pretty easy because we lived in a town called, my parents still live there now, but in a town called Reading, right? And Reading is, if you ask me, is probably one of the good places, one of the best places to live in England, especially like a really multicultural kind of area where look, I'm not going to be ignorant and say that, you don't have things like, people that are foolish there, right? You have them everywhere, right? But for the most part, Reading is probably, one of the places that I think, I never really experienced a lot of that sort of prejudice outwardly, right? I mean, I could maybe remember one incident, right? And that's about it, right? But otherwise, for the most part, it wasn't really like that. So it was easy for me to fit in there because I was pretty young, right? So, and the friends that I grew up with, we all started pretty young and grew up together. So it was easy for me to customize and just be part of just everything.
How young were you?
And I won't tell you that only because you're gonna figure out my age, so there's no need for that, right? And let's just say I was in school.
Why are you being secretive?
I was in school, basically. I was in school. So
that's really vague.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just I was not in college, right?
I was in school.
You were smart enough to figure that out. So I was not in college. In England, you go to college at 16.
I may be smart enough, but there may be people watching who's not smart enough to figure it out.
Tough luck.
Oh wow. Okay. How long did you stay in the UK overall? Like a good.
Well, for about 20 years. About 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
And then you come. 20 years it didn't. So 20 years in the UK before coming to New Zealand.
Yes, about that. Yeah.
Okay, so for you, I guess your cultural lens would be different. So, you have the original Zambian upbringing.
Yep.
And then you have that UK twang added into the mix and thrown into the pot, and then you had to come to New Zealand and then assimilate there. So, can you tell me like what was that like? That cultural fit into
New Zealand.
Yeah, because you obviously you already come with a vast like perspective of life from living in two different nations.
Yeah.
And here's your third nation you're coming into.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting experience because I think if I look at my sort of childhood, the memories that I have are basically me growing up in England. Like I don't remember many things, for example, growing up in Zambia, right? I don't remember that many things at all, right? And so my perspective is shaped by my growing up in England, basically. And so everything that I sort of know basically is based from that. And so, for example, when I came to New Zealand, a whole bunch of things were just really strange and really odd, right? But one of the first things I sort of remember is that things just seemed really expensive here, actually. Like, I'll give you a very simple example. Like, I don't know, like buying a croissant, right? Like, like, I don't know.
I'm trying to save up to buy a croissant right now.
Like $3 for a croissant, man. Like, something like that, right? And then, like, for example, in England, you go to shops like Lidl, right? And then you pay like 50p, right? 50 less than 50 cents, basically, right? For a croissant, right? And then that was the first thing that stood out. I was like, oh man, things are really expensive here, right? And the other thing is that I think that time was, like in 2009, I think it was like £2 to $1 or something like that, right? So I came in thinking, man, I've got so much money, right? Because I was thinking I was converting from pounds to dollars, right? I was like, man, this is so cool, right? So that was the other thing that was quite strange. And the other thing I found quite odd as well is the roads were so small and just like really narrow, like seriously, and people were driving really fast, right? And this tailgating business, man, the Kiwis love to tailgate, man.
Tailgate, bro. Professional tailgaters.
I was thinking, what is going on here, right? Now, I remember driving down to Coromandel one time and this really windy road, right? And there's me, I'm new in this place. This road is like really windy. There's a cliff on my side, and I'm like, I'm gonna take my time, right? These guys behind me beeping their horns, right? I'm like, okay, so it's like that here then, right? Like seriously, that was like for me, a couple of things that just were really, really odd. And
you do drive slow though, like in their defense.
No. That's it's funny. It's funny, right? Like once you've been here long enough, then you start kind of driving like the people in New Zealand. Right? I mean, so right now I don't tailgate. I try not to, but I think it's quite weird. So that's something that did stand out for me. So a couple of things like just like that, right? And just the fact that it was really far as well, like so far from everything else. So we sort of went back to England every 2 years from 2009, like going back every 2 years. Now I realized going back there that, for example, if I had $10,000, right, that was instantly reduced to £5,000. That really hurt. That really hurt. Right?
And this is the norm.
The other way around was really good. Like I'm like, I've got £5,000. I've got $10,000. Yeah, great. But the other way around, oh, man. Yeah, I really felt that. Right. So it's little things like that, and then
it's better when it's in reverse though. When someone sends you money. Yeah, like, when my brother sends me money, it feels like Christmas.
Do you know what? The funny thing is that because I'm the oldest in my family, right? So I tend to send my siblings money, or I used to send them money, right? So for me, it was always the other way around.
Oh, yes. You send them $100.
So my brother is like,
$10, man.
One of my brothers would be like, oh, can I just have, whatever it is, right? Like they might just say something like, oh, can I just, I don't know, £250, right? And I'm thinking, £250, that's like $600, man. I mean, if you ask me, ask him for that every other month or whatever it is, right? That's a huge chunk of change, you know what I mean? So that's the other thing I sort of noticed as well. But yeah, so some really, really interesting stuff. And I think just the language as well. It's funny, but everyone speaks English, right? But obviously, it just sounded quite different. Right? I remember one time when I was trying to buy a car and I went to this, this guy, that's selling cars, right? And he goes to me, because he sort of saw me come up, right? Obviously, first things first, you judge a man by what you see, right? That's exactly what he did, right? And then obviously, before I said anything, and I opened my mouth, right, he just looked at me weirdly, like, wow, I wasn't expecting that Pommy accent. And I was like, what? Right? So it was quite strange, right? And I was just like, obviously, I sounded quite differently then, right?
What do you think he was expecting?
I have no idea. Hello, I don't know, right? I'm not quite sure, but that's pretty much, that's pretty much what the guy said to me, right? He's like, I wasn't expecting that.
Bro, I get way worse than that. No one's expecting an African American. When I open my, because honestly, Fijian people get so brokenhearted when they meet me.
Oh yeah, what are they
just Bula, hey brother, you from Fiji, brother? Hey brother, hey, hey brother. And I'm like, no, I'm actually from Chicago. And they just the look. This is a legit story. Happened in Pack and Save, man. Yeah. This guy was packing the ice creams. Yeah. He was packing the tip top ice creams, and he just dropped the whole pallet. He was just like, brother. And he has such joy in his eyes, like a little kid who saw Mickey Mouse for the first time. He's like, brother. Yeah. Where you from, brother? Bula. I was like, no, I'm actually from Chicago, man. I'm American. And he's like, everything just dropped.
Oh, you disappointed him, man.
Oh, man. It just dropped. I almost want to start lying to people.
I know, right?
Remember I told you that story about the Ghanaian lady who was whispering to me at a wedding?
No, I don't know about that one.
So me, just in case you guys don't know this story, me and my wife went to a wedding one time, and it was a Ghanaian wedding, and this lady, she just comes speaking to me, and in that language, and she's whispering in my ear.
Yeah.
And like she was whispering for a long time, because she just automatically assumed.
Yes.
And I was just like, and when she finished, I just turned around and I was like, I have no idea what you just said, but thank you. You seem like a very nice lady. And she just looked at me. She's like, "Oh!" And she starts laughing at herself.
She burst out.
Oh, she burst out of laughter, man. Like, because that could have been way more awkward for her.
Yeah.
Like she laughed. She's like, "Oh, I thought you were." Like, yeah.
Funny. I get that too. Actually, even and this is the thing, right? It's like even from other sort of people from the African continent, I get that too as well, right? Because obviously, the other thing I noticed when I came to New Zealand in 2009, there were not that many black people here at all. Right? Yeah. I could literally see one black person every 2 months on the streets, right? Because I worked in the city, right in the middle.
Did you take a photo every time that happened?
And it was one of those things.
The black person over there.
And here's the thing, right? Like you literally see the person coming, right? Yeah. You go out of your way to wave and to just kind of like acknowledge that okay, there's someone else like me type thing, right? That was quite common actually. Like,
it's still happening, Daddy.
It's actually happened, yeah. There's a lot less now. There's
a lot
still
less.
Happening. But I see a lot more black people now, so it's quite different now, right? Like, for example, like in other countries, like in England, there's so many black people there, right? Even in America, right? Like, I mean, you kind of acknowledge each other and whatever, right? But here it's quite different. There was that thing about, I see you type thing, like in Avatar, right? I see you, right? It was literally like that, right? Yeah.
It's like, what are we doing, man?
Yeah, and then so that was also quite interesting. And I had definitely, like you as well, I had instances where someone would be like, I'd be walking, right? And then, like in Pack and Save as well, I wonder where's Pack and Save, right?
It's all about Pack and Save.
Pack and Save, right? And then someone would be like...
That's what immigrants meet.
I know, right? That's an immigrant shop.
It's the immigrant shop. They're going to need to rename it to immigrants.
I know, right?
Immigrant shop. Immigrant Save.
I remember one time, like these guys, I think they were from Zimbabwe, I think it was, right? Zambia and Zimbabwe are neighbors type thing, right? And so the language is kind of similar in some aspects, right? Or some of the languages anyway. And, they start saying like these things in Shona and stuff, right? And obviously I have no idea. I don't really speak Shona, right? And I just be like, sorry, I'm not from Zimbabwe. Fortunately, I kind of know that from Zimbabwe, because I can tell from what they're saying. So it's always quite funny, that they just almost assume immediately that you're from Zimbabwe as well, right? And the one time though I did actually hear a Zambian person, it was quite funny because there were two of them. There was a couple in Pack and Save as well, and just kind of just talking, right? And I actually heard that, right? And it was quite weird and quite refreshing in a way, because I was just like, I actually recognize that, right? I recognize the language, so that was quite interesting as well. But I even forgot the question. What was the question? What were we talking about?
I forgot the question as well. But that's all right. We'll move on, man. It's all good. It's all good. Like we getting your story, so that's all good. I think I asked you about, just your story settling in.
Oh yes.
Because this is your third country, and like most people, like me, like I'm coming from one country and moving to another. You had already immigrated.
Yeah.
Just like my wife, she come from South Africa and went to the UK as well and ended up here. So it's just like it'll have to be a lot of culture shock. It's like a double culture shock.
Yeah.
Coming to New Zealand. So I guess you settled in. So just give us a timeline. So you came here. How did you end up in the industry that you're in?
I guess so. When I was back in England, I studied software engineering, right? And so I actually already was working at a bank when I was in England. So when I obviously came over to New Zealand, I just I was looking for a particular role, that was aligned to my background and stuff that I'd done before.
Yeah.
And I just kind of applied for a couple of roles, and I think that was just after the global financial crisis sort of thing in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
And it was pretty easy actually, I guess, just to find a job really, because there's quite a few roles in my sort of area. In my industry, for some reason, there's always jobs in my industry. Right?
Yeah, so it would be a shortage for sure.
Yeah, I just applied and bang, and job was there. Started the job. It's funny, one thing I do remember though, right? And as I said, this is not really about my employer, so they've got nothing to do with this, right? When I joined, because I was coming from England then, and the whole idea of the currency still hadn't settled with me just yet, right? And so, for example, like say in England I was getting paid like say $25,000, right? As an example, pounds, sorry, right? As an example, as a grad, right? Then it was like pretty decent, right? Because I finished university. When I came to New Zealand, I think I was offered something like, as an example, say something like say 50,000 New Zealand dollars, right? And then in my mind, I was thinking, man, that sounds like a lot of money. I didn't even question that. I was just like, oh, snap, that sounds like a lot of money. Because I think then I was still thinking about the differences between £25,000 and $50,000. So I was just like, oh yeah, cool, great. So again, that's just an example, right? So I sort of just took whatever they gave me. I didn't really think about it type thing. It just felt like it seemed like it was a lot of money then, right? Mm-hmm. But I think it's only in hindsight when I realized actually, I was like, oh man, I could have actually, if I really knew kind of how things work in terms of how to look at the currency thing properly, I could have actually been like, hey, look, why are you offering me that? I mean, I can probably get much more than that, right? So that was another really interesting thing that I found. But anyway, it was corrected afterwards, right? But I literally came in at a particular rate, which was in my mind then seemed okay, but in hindsight actually wasn't probably right. Right, but it was corrected quite quickly, so that was all good. But job wise, it was pretty easy for me to sort of just find a role. I've been pretty fortunate, so it's been pretty good.
Did you ever feel like you just stuck out like a sore thumb being here? Or do you?
You know what? As much as I would like to say that I can blend in easily, I don't know. It's usually just that I notice with interest that when I talk to someone on the phone, sometimes they can't make out what's going on the other side. They don't really know because I sound quite different.
So when you talk to Kiwis, is that what you're saying? When you have like a conversation with a Kiwi person?
Just on the phone. It could be Kiwi, or it could be some other place, right? Again, depending on the definition of Kiwi, right? Because it depends on what.
My definition of Kiwi is someone who's been here their entire life.
Yeah. Okay.
They've been their entire life, and this is all they know.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can relate to that. Talking to someone like that.
Yeah.
Because I also feel like I'm talking Chinese when I talk to someone who's been here their entire life, and I'm talking English. Yeah. But the New Zealand English is a different style of English, depending on who you're talking to, especially if you're talking to someone from Gisborne versus talking to someone from Auckland.
Yeah.
So it's the English is just different. Like the way they say words are different. Like me and my boss always have like these back and forth debates about the way I sound versus the way he sound.
Yeah.
I don't understand, why New Zealand people have such hate against the letter R. It hasn't done anything to anyone.
All right.
It hasn't done anything to anyone, but for some reason they seem to want to crucify this letter.
Right, yeah.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, not star. I didn't get here with my car. I just don't understand. Like, what did R do to you?
I know,
family?
right? Yeah.
But that's another conversation. But just on that note. Okay, sorry, we get off track.
No.
Let's do high points and low points. All right. Come to New Zealand. Obviously, you're already really smart guy, really educated guy. So is your wife. Well, she's not a guy. Sorry.
No, she's it's not that kind of talk show,
she's
right?
educated.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. She's very, very, very. That's Dr. Paulina.
Yes.
She's very, very smart. Let's talk about high points, low points. So when we talk about high points, what I mean is, what is something that really made you fall in love with New Zealand? Or something that really made you say, "Oh, wow!" Stand back and like, "Oh, this New Zealand culture is amazing."
You know what? I guess because the intent was to be here for 4 years, right? While Pauline was doing her studying, right, and then leave afterwards.
Yeah.
And 13 years later, we're still here, right? And I guess that in itself is quite telling, because one of the things is that I think it was easy enough for both of us to assimilate, just to settle, right? And I think the fact that, from a job point of view, was pretty easy. And we also found a really good community in terms of the church that we go to as well, right? So that helped quite a lot, because, then we found a whole bunch of people that were kind of like us in so many ways as well, right? And then, so that was one thing. And I think, the differences between sort of New Zealand and England in terms of just, the culture and just the way the place is, there's stark differences, of course, right? For example, like in Reading, where I used to live, right? It's like, you don't see as much nature as you see in New Zealand, right? Like literally in New Zealand, like you could go for, I don't know, whether it's 25 miles or whatever it is, right? And you end up at a beach somewhere, right? And so there was those parts of New Zealand that were just very different from what I was used to, right? Yeah. And just I think when we came here, we did a lot of traveling on a northern island, right? Like we went just everywhere pretty much, and just loved that. Right, just the travel, just the free air, just the and the weather. Weather was quite weird, right? And at first, I remember before I came to New Zealand, someone was saying to me, right, "Oh, the weather in New Zealand is really beautiful. It's just really nice all the time," right? So I was kind of expecting that.
Who told you that?
I know, right? I know, right? And then come here, and I think when we got here, it was actually really good. But it actually got to a stage where it was cold enough that the windows on the car were frosty, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's a part no one told me about." But again, even then, that pales in comparison to kind of the winters you get in England, right?
Yep.
That's like, and so I wasn't really complaining about that, right? So weather-wise was definitely an improvement, right? So it was definitely an improvement from kind of the weather you get in England. Even in the winter, it's just more rain. Just rain is annoying, but that's about it, right? So those things like just the nature, the land, and I think people generally are pretty good as well, actually. And if I kind of look back on the 13 years, right, I've had some pretty good interactions with everyone that I've run into, for the most part, right? I don't have many instances or incidents that I can talk to where I've had really negative sort of interactions with people like Kiwis, as you based on your definition. I've had one or two maybe, right? I remember one time I was on the bus, right? And then this lady bus driver, I know someone did put up a complaint, for this lady, right? I can't remember. I just asked for instructions, right? So maybe she just didn't understand what I was saying, right? For whatever reason, right? She just yelled something at me, right? And I said, "Oh, I'm just trying to find out where the next stop is or whatever the thing was." Yeah. And then she goes to me, blah, 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 blah. You should go back to where you came from, right? And I was like, "Oh, okay." Right, but then...
When was this?
Oh, this is probably in 2011 or thereabouts, right? That was on the bus, literally,
Go back to where you came.
Yeah, that's right, right? Nice. So that was the first time I kind of got that, right? And I was just like, oh, okay, so you do have people like that here as well. And that's the thing that, you're always going to have people like that in different places, right? And obviously I have no idea, what else is going on with her, whether that morning she had a terrible day or whatever it is. She's no excuse, of course. But that was just one of the things I do remember, right? But again, for me, it was kind of a minor incident in a way, right? Because I think that same lady was one of those, like you have certain people just, I don't know, it's kind of mean in a way, right? And I realized that almost everyone that got on that bus had some sort of interaction with that lady, right? And so in a way, I just found that maybe she just probably said the first thing that came to her mind about me. And then for the next person, she said something else to them as well. So I kind of acknowledged that as well. So that was the one thing. And then the other one, the incident, not an incident, this was a very good and teachable moment for me. And this was a couple of weeks ago, right? And I've actually written a blog about this. So I went for I'm doing the 10,000 steps per day thing I was telling you about, right? So I went for a run in the morning on a Saturday. So that's me running, I have my earphones in, and then I'm running, right, in my neighborhood. And then this car drives past me, and then these people in the car shout something at me, right? And I didn't hear what they said, right? I'm like, oh, okay, I wonder what they said. And I was kind of annoyed, right? I was like, okay, what's the point? What's the need to shout something at me? And I'm just kind of, I want to go for a run and just enjoy my run, right? And I was kind of annoyed, and I was just like, oh, I wonder what I would say to them if I met up with these people, right? And lo and behold, as I'm running around the corner, I see the car parked, right? So my heart sort of skipped a beat, and I'm just like, oh, okay, so here's an opportunity for me to actually really kind of think, kind of say something to see what's going on here. And, there's this one book I was reading a while ago by a lady called Brené Brown. It's talk about Dare to Lead. And there's a part in the book where she says, do something brave, not something comfortable, to paraphrase how she puts it, right? Sometimes it's easier for us to do something that's comfortable, not something that's brave, right? Yeah. So when I was going past them, I see these guys parked outside, and I'm thinking, I should just leave it, right? But I was like, nah. I'm just going to step up to them and see what's going on, right? So I went up to them. There was 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl, right? And I said to them, hey, guys, did you guys shout something at me when you saw me drive, when you drove past me? And what did you shout? And why did you see the need to shout what you shouted, right? And they were literally taken by surprise. They're like, whoa, right? And I'm like, I just want to know what you guys said. And then obviously, the guy who was probably the leader of the pack was just like, no, we didn't say anything, whatever it was, right? And then, the other 2 sort of slightly smaller boys, they're kind of already, because we were taken by surprise, they're like, yeah, we did, right? Because we were quite shocked about the whole thing, right? And I said to them, so just want to know what you said and why. I said to them, is it because, I was just kind of being silly, right? I'm like, is it because I'm brown? Or is it because some other reason, right? And then that really stopped them in their tracks. Right? Like, oh, no, it's nothing to do with that, mate. Whatever it was, right? And they're like, oh, no, we were just saying that, we just wanted to say that, run faster because we saw you run. We just wanted to encourage you. So, and here's the thing. I wasn't expecting that, right? I wasn't expecting these guys to be yelling something like run faster. In my mind, I was just thinking, because, people have yelled stuff. Sometimes it's not the nicest things, right? But this time around, I was thinking, I wonder what they yelled at me, And then when I found out they just yelled or run faster, for me, it was a bit of a, again, I'm like,
do you believe that's what they said, though?
But here's the thing, right? And here's the thing, right? These guys, and because I had a bit of a chat with them, right? And I have to say that obviously, maybe just me being naive or whatever it was, right? But they kind of seemed like if they wanted to essentially just stand the ground and say, yeah, we said whatever we said, they could have done that, right? But then they didn't, right? And so, because I had a bit of a dialogue with them, right? So it was a bit of a teaching moment. And I said to them, and they said, oh, we're just saying that. And I said to them, well, firstly, guys, I didn't hear what you said. So I just assumed that you might have said something that's not very nice, because sometimes people yell stuff and it's not nice, right? And sometimes, why do you feel the need to yell at something at me when I'm running? Whereas I'm sure someone else that looks different from me, you probably wouldn't even bother, right? But me, somehow you wanted to yell something, right? And then they're like, oh, yeah, no, we didn't mean anything about it, and so on and so forth. And there was a girl amongst them, right? And the girl was just kind of not even paying attention. She's just looking around like, this has nothing to do with me, right? And I said to her, and I said to the girl, I said, look, you're a girl, right? How do you feel when you're walking down the streets and someone starts yelling all these things about you, hey, sexy, or whatever the thing is, right? And that literally stopped her in her tracks as well. And she's like, oh, yeah, I get that too. And I was like, how do you feel? She goes, no, I don't like it, right? Now, the boys kind of changed their view as well, because before they were kind of laughing and smiling, right? And I said to them, so that's kind of sometimes how I feel. I just don't need people to be yelling stuff at me unnecessarily, right? And I said, because I think the girl, for all of a sudden, because she kind of removed herself from the discussion, right? But that is what brought her back into the situation to realize. And I said to them, fellas, boys, I'm sure you've got sisters and mothers and whatever, right? So, if people are yelling stuff at them, you probably wouldn't like that, would you, right? So, and I said to them, look, you just have to be mindful, right, of the things that you say to people. You just can't say things to people just because you feel like you can say it, right? Because you don't know what people are dealing with, right? And not everyone is as nice as you guys, because you just said you just trying to encourage me. But some people, say some really nasty things, and because I didn't hear what you said, I just assumed the worst, right? And so that could ruin my day, right? And like, oh yeah, look, man, we're really sorry, we didn't really mean that, and da 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 da. So it was a really interesting teaching moment for me as well, but for the 4 of them as well, because I think for me, what I was trying to say to them is that, look, you just can't say stuff to people just to feel like you can.
Do you want to count this as your low moment? New Zealand low moment, or do you have something else?
Nah, that's probably it. I think those 2 moments are probably the ones I can think about that might probably say the lowest, right? For the most part, it's been pretty decent, I think.
What do you? No, I'll leave it.
No, go for it. Just ask it, man.
I mean, what ethnicity were these people that yelled at you?
Well, there was just your traditional Kiwis, as someone put it to me. By traditional, as in your I guess your white Kiwis, kind of young white Kiwis, yeah.
And I guess the question to you is like, this is a little challenge.
Yeah.
Just a little challenge. If these were, people who are, of African descent, would you have still went back and challenged, or find out what they said?
Yeah, actually, I would have. And here's the funny thing is about this is now, if they were of, say, African or Asian descent, or whatever it was, right? But I wonder whether they would have felt the need to shout that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's I don't know, but one of it's funny thing about that situation. It kind of speaks to what I've noticed in New Zealand about New Zealand culture and not really dealing with confrontation well.
Yeah,
because the fact that you decided to confront, that is what I've noticed a continual trend in New Zealand, and in pretty much every office situation I've been in, every job I've had here in New Zealand. New Zealand's an awesome place to work and to live, but I think that's probably one of the tweaks that New Zealand can probably work on, especially dealing with people who've migrated here, how to deal with confrontation.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with two different perspectives. We are, I always say to people that in New Zealand has so many nations in one nation.
Yeah.
And to be such a small place, 5 million people with all these different countries living in it, so dealing with that confrontation is huge, and that's it. That story kind of highlights it perfectly. You chose to confront. I don't think they were ready for that.
No, they weren't. Yeah.
Me personally, I'm not convinced that they say it run faster, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you handled it the way you handled it. I may have handled it a little bit differently. You probably handled it better than I would have handled it. But I think, end of the day, no matter what your response is, it pretty much highlights the normal state of New Zealand confrontation, whether it's I was on the street or in the office or in the politics. It's the same thing. We just don't really deal with confrontation well, even with the recent, vaccines and stuff like that. That alone, we just don't know how to disagree or disagree in a healthy way to a point where we can still be contributors to society, and no one needs to walk away and get canceled or get hurt, or it's just with cancel culture, it's like,
I know, it's crazy, it's ridiculous, right?
You're not allowed to have an opinion, you're not allowed to say anything, you're not allowed to think. So the fact that you went and did that was pretty big in itself.
Yeah, this is why, going back to what I said earlier about, I'm not a big fan of sort of certain terms, even the whole immigrants kind of term, because I think, when you slap a label on people, it's just easy to then put them on the side and treat them in a certain way, right? Because they are that label, right? There are the anti-vaxxers, or there are the, the rednecks, or whatever you want to call them, right? Because once you label a people or a group of people in a certain way, then you can do whatever you want to do with that. Right, it's easier to then say stuff about them, to sideline them, and to not listen to them because they've got that label, right? So you're right. So I think that, and unfortunately, the world is meant to be getting better in terms of just sort of just openness and everyone getting on, and equality, and there's a whole bunch of things going on, which are great, right? But I still think in a way we're still digressing as well. In a way, there's certain things, and I don't know what the cause of that is, right? I'm sure people will tell you things, but I just feel like sometimes we almost kind of going back in a way, right? There's this nationalism that's creeping into certain areas, right? And I don't know whether it's because of how the media portrays things, and I don't know whether there are actually underlying issues somewhere that are not being dealt with, and therefore people feeling that they can just express their views in a certain way. Yeah. Right. But I guess one thing that I tend to sort of think about a lot now that I'm a father, I've got 2 boys, right? I really can always think about, sort of what my kids would have to deal with. Yeah. Right. And I've always wondered about that. Right. And this is the thing, right? Because obviously my kids will always stand out. In New Zealand, for example, they won't just fit in per se, from a distance, right? And so I'm always kind of wondering, I wonder what the future really is like for my kids in New Zealand, especially, and this is why sometimes I feel like when there's an opportunity to kind of, not educate people, but to share a particular view with certain people, you should do that, right? And this is why those boys that I talked to, the 4 people I met on the streets, right? I just felt like, again, it felt like it was a genuine discussion between the 4 of us. Because I think at the end of it was like, oh yeah, sorry mate, have a good day, and da-da-da. And again, they actually did seem quite genuine, right? Now you're right, maybe they weren't, right? But I actually think that in a way, right? Hopefully that was a bit of a moment for them to pause and think about that in the future, right? So, and the other thing I tend to think about is that, there's a lot going on, in terms of kind of, equality and diversity and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of workplaces that are doing that, and which is great, right? But I feel like in a way it's a little bit late, because then if you're trying to change people when they're already grown up, like in a workplace, right? That's a little bit late, right? You probably want to start doing some of those things a lot more, when people are still young and like when they're still kids, right? And this is why, I know quite a few instances where some kids in daycare or even in preschool, right? Like for example, some black kids in school, they get picked on by their friends simply because they're quite different.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And so if you're not educating the kids at that age to try to show them actually people are different, people, have different skin tones and shades and stuff, if you can't teach them at that age and they grow up with certain views, right? By the time they get older and you try to bring in these diversity policies, right? It's a little bit late because they're already settled in their minds. And so this is why I think that, if things are to change in a way, right? If you were to support immigrants or people like that discussion needs to start much, much earlier than, when people are already, kind of adults and grown up because they're already set in their ways.
Okay. Well, look, as we get ready to start the close, what are some, it can either be funny or interesting aspects of Kiwi culture that you just are your favorite things here or something you just can't seem to get your head around yet?
I guess one thing that I still find quite odd and just, I still haven't got my head around it. It's just, I guess the accent thing is always interesting, but like, Kiwis say like data. No, so they say data, right? And I said data, right? And that always, for some reason, I always hear that. Right? I've always kind of literally always heard that, when I'm at work, because I work in that sort of space, right? Like the database, or data quality or data analysis, right? And I'm like, it's data. Yeah. So that's one thing that somehow I've been here long enough, but I still hear that.
But you say status, and I say status.
Yeah, see, that's weird. That is weird.
It's not
status.
weird. It's the correct way of saying it.
Is that right? But I'm not saying. Here's the thing, right? So obviously, data is not really. I don't think it's not major, right? It's something that just kind of I hear that all the time, right? So that's one thing.
Well, I guess what about your favorite Kiwi thing?
I think just traveling and Kiwis, man, they love being outside, man. And that's one thing that I think like. In England, you don't really get a lot of time to be outside, and not where we live anyway, right? So you're always kind of indoors, especially, But I think Kiwis love being outside, and I think that's one of the great things that I really love about this, sort of New Zealand. Is just it gets you to be outdoors, right? Yeah. So my wife and I literally had to kind of, learn to be outdoorsy people because we were not, stay at home all the time. But now, especially with the kids, right, we found that we have to do a lot more things outside. So that's one thing I really appreciate because obviously, it's good to be in nature and, getting some of that vitamin D and that sort of thing. So that's one thing I really think like about New Zealand, actually, that just the outside kind of culture type thing is actually quite cool. So
in summary, you want us to, it'd be good for the culture to kind of revisit the definition of immigrant.
Yeah.
And maybe use expat for everyone. You don't consider yourself an immigrant, you consider yourself an expat.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you look at the definition of an expat, that is, i.e.
I looked at the definition. Okay, it's the exact same as the definition of an immigrant.
No, actually, it's not. Reread it.
No, I don't know what website it was. What did you
read it again?
Just tell me what you found.
Just read it again.
What did you find?
Okay, let me tell you the definition.
Tell me, brother.
Let me tell you the differences.
I'm interested. I want to know because I thought it was pretty much more or less the same.
It's funny. There's a subtle difference, right? It says an expat is a person who lives outside of the native country.
Right? It is subtle. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. Who lives outside the native country. On the other hand, an immigrant is a person who has left his own country to live in another country. You dig?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very subtle difference, right? And I think with a lot of people that come from England, actually, they're called the British expats, right? I.e., they left in England to come and live in New Zealand or Australia or whatever the places they're expats.
Right? Okay, so this is, so that makes sense.
That's quite different, yeah.
And this is probably why, American government still want me to pay taxes.
Yeah, unless you give up your American citizenship, right? Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Oh, okay. Now that makes sense.
Yeah, because you're still American.
I'm still technically...
Yeah.
Oh. Well, look, if you were to give an advice to future expats...
Yeah. Or immigrants, because
immigrants.
Yeah, then there can be immigrants as well. That's not to say, whatever, right? There are definitely immigrants and expats, and I think the other one is foreigners and whatever.
Yeah.
So there's all of those terms are actually sort of interchange in a way. But I think it's just that how generally people see them is quite different from what the definitions are.
Well, I was going to ask, obviously 13 years, the immigration, New Zealand, their policies and their rules and regulations have changed hundreds of times since then.
Yeah.
So I know you said for you the process was pretty seamless. For me, it was a little bumpy. But for other people, it's a nightmare. So I guess what would you say, like, as they get ready to possibly, migrate to New Zealand? How would you speak? Like, what would you, maybe tips and tricks, immigration hacks, anything like that? What do you have to say to those people?
That's probably a question you should ask Paulina, actually, because Paulina is really good at that sort of thing, right? Because obviously I can't really speak from experience in a way, because if I talk for people that say coming from say England or some other place where you're allowed to come in, like for maybe 2 years or whatever the thing is, right? It's pretty easy. Like literally just apply and you get a visa.
But what about culturally? Right? You can still speak culturally, because you had to, you had a double culture shock coming here. So what would you say?
I guess I think it's just be sort of be ready to integrate. I guess is probably the thing, right? So there'll be some things that are very different, right? And I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time to come, to customize or acclimatize, right? And I think it's just being ready for that as well, and accepting the fact that people will be different, right? And accepting the fact that, for example, if you're a certain kind of person, you will stand out. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but know your rights, and you don't have to walk around cowering like I'm not meant to be here type thing. If you come here because you wanted to come here, then you should literally walk proud and be like, I'm here because I'm adding to the to the economy, I'm adding to the well-being of this nation. It's not like for example, people are doing you a favor. I think that's for me the mentality that needs to change. Right, so that way, people say things that are not nice or whatever it is, right? It should be like, just see them for what they are, right? There are ignorant people everywhere. That's not to say everyone is, right? Some really great people, right? And so it's just really knowing that actually, if I decided to come here, because I feel like I can add to this nation, and therefore I should be walking confidently, right? And ignore those foolish people that saying foolish stuff, right? And then if you are I guess a migrant that's come along because you from a particular situation, I think it's just, I guess, also being grateful as well. I think is the other thing as well. I think gratitude is the other thing to consider. I think there's so many good things in New Zealand, right? And sometimes you can get caught up in what's not working and what's this and that, right? But actually, if you just take a step back and look around, you're like, actually, it's a great place to be as well. Nature.
It really is, man.
Yeah. So
overall,
gratitude is the other thing.
Gratitude for sure.
Yeah.
All right, man. Any final thoughts? Before I give my final thoughts.
No, not really. I mean, I think we've talked about quite a few things, and we really haven't gotten to the depth of a lot of things. But I definitely wanted just to say that it really made me think twice when I saw that sort of email coming through and saying that we want to give immigrants a view or whatever the email said, right? And really made me think for the first time that actually, generally when some people see me, they kind of see me as an immigrant, and sometimes, unfortunately, when people put labels on people, they act in a certain way as well. Yeah. So I think that at the same time, people should avoid feeling like they're doing people a favor type thing. If you genuinely care for other people, just do it. Not because you feel like I'm doing these immigrants a favor. Nah, it shouldn't be like that. Right. So that's the thing. So, and I think, that's probably the main thing. I think maybe closing off with that.
No, man. Thanks for coming to the show. I really appreciate your feedback.
No, thanks for having me. It's fun.
No, it was really good challenge. Like, just my last 2 cents. Like, I've never thought about the whole expat immigration definition.
You're welcome.
Can I have the opportunity to say thank you first
you're welcome?
Before you say you're welcome,
I'm preempting.
Because that kind of like makes the you're welcome redundant.
Okay, go on.
I don't even get a chance to say thank you.
Go on then.
Thank you for the opportunity to see things differently.
You're welcome.
Which is what this show is about. That's what the show is about, man. It's just about getting those different perspectives from people around the world. Like, that actually has started a chain of events in my mind that I don't have time to do on this one podcast, but probably maybe we can have you back if you want to. Have you back on season 2.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I tell you what, sorry, just quickly, right? I think what you should, if you guys don't already have this planned, it'll be really good to bring an expat onto the show as well, and just kind of see how they see their integration into New Zealand, right? And then call them an immigrant, see what they say, right? find someone from England or or from Spain or one of those countries, right? And then actually talk to them as well, because I think if we're looking at immigrants, right, then in a way that maybe you can define them as that as well. So bring one of those guys here and then talk to them, rather than just bringing people from Zambia, from Lusaka, or from Afghanistan or whatever it is. Bring some of the other people from here as well.
You're talking about identification, like how you identify.
Yeah, because I think if this particular podcast is really about giving immigrants, right, a voice, or to get their perspective, whatever it is, right, then it should be everyone, really, right? So,
100%.
If you're saying, for example, people that come from America that are, for example, white Americans or white sort of British people, bring them on the show, talk to them, right? And say, hey, we want to give immigrants a voice from the view and see their perspective and see their responses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, challenge accepted. Challenge accepted, man. I think that'd be good. That'd be really good. Because again, I didn't even think about it until you said it yesterday about how people may identify themselves living in New Zealand. For me, I didn't even think about the word. I came up with the name of the podcast because I know that phrase, immigration status, is something everyone's familiar with.
Right.
When they come over here, it's just a name. So that little hyphen in the middle is talking about what is your stat. Us, like we're talking about stats, statistics. So it's just like a play on words type thing. I never even thought about that term expat. I only really hear that when people are talking about taxes.
Right.
When that country wants some money from you.
Yeah.
That's the only time I even think about expat. But no, that's a really good perspective. And I appreciate your perspective. I always do appreciate your perspective. And it's just, I think we head into very interesting times in New Zealand.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously with the new mandates have now been dropped. So in a couple of days, things will be different again.
Yep.
And it's still another mess that has caused, because now the people who lost their jobs are looking like, well,
that's right.
What about my job? I heard Air New Zealand hired like 800 people back.
Did they?
Yeah.
It's this word is
it's crazy what's happening.
Anti-vaxxers out. That's what they were saying, right? But now it's like, hold on a minute.
Yeah, hold on a minute.
We might have just jumped the gun there. But look, I'm not a politician, and I don't have a particular view on. Actually, I do have a particular view, but
we're not going to get into that today.
About, yes.
We're not going to get into that. That's a whole nother, that's a podcast series in itself.
That's right.
Talking about the vaccine. So we won't do that today. But thank you, man. Like, I appreciate you coming by. This has been good. So episode 4 done and dusted. I just want to thank once again our sponsors, Ministries for Ethnic Communities, Uranga, and also Campfire Studios and Navigators Group. I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please tune in for more. Thank you for watching episode 4. Please remember to click subscribe to the YouTube channel. We need more subscribers. There's not that many there, and I want to get that number up. Also, if you see any videos on Facebook or on LinkedIn, share the content. There's way more content on the way. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch and see how this grows and how it spreads across the world. Today we actually learned the difference of the definition between expat and immigrant, something I didn't even know about, and maybe you didn't know about, but Danny's always had really, really interesting views, which is why I invited him onto the show, and I hope he comes back for another one. Special thanks to our sponsors, Uranga and the Navigators Group, Campfire Studios, and Ministries for Ethnic Communities. I'm Myron Turner, and we'll see you next time.